The disaster began with a sound no one on the first Boston trading floor ever forgot. A sudden, stunned silence. Moments earlier, the room had been its usual orchestra of shouts, ringing phones, and the hard snap of orders being executed. Then the screens recalculated. Yields surged. Prices collapsed. And in a single sweep of red numbers, Larry Fink, the firm's star architect of mortgage-backed securities, saw the trade that was supposed to crown his ascent turn into a crater. It was 1986, and he stood at the pinnacle of a Wall Street era intoxicated by innovation. At 33, he was the prodigy who helped rewrite how global finance moved money. Executives cited his performance to impress clients. Competitors studied his strategies to catch up. His rise had been so fast, so assured, that many inside the firm whispered he was destined to run the place one day. But interest rates did not care about legends. They spiked, violently and without warning. The models he trusted had missed the shift. His assumptions, long rewarded, betrayed him. By the time the quarter closed, the magnitude was undeniable. $100 million gone, evaporated under his watch. For a bank built on discipline, this was not simply a loss. It was a rupture. He walked through hallways where colleagues once nodded with admiration and now avoided eye contact. In closed-door meetings, senior leaders shifted from praise to blame with practiced efficiency. Fink wasn't fired in a dramatic scene. He was sidelined, isolated, erased from future plans. Soon, the message became impossible to ignore. The firm that once celebrated his instincts had no room for his failure. But amid the humiliation, a sharper insight cut through the noise. The catastrophe hadn't been born from recklessness alone. It came from blindness. Wall Street bragged about risk, but it didn't truly measure it. Traders chased returns without understanding the machinery beneath them. Systems were fragmented. Data was scattered. Risk was a hunch, not a discipline. Standing in the wreckage of his reputation, Fink recognized the flaw that had cost him everything and the opportunity hidden inside it. If he could build a system that understood risk the way no human intuition ever could, he could transform finance. The $100 million mistake was not his ending. It was the moment he understood precisely what needed to be reinvented. Long before the trading floors and corporate boardrooms, Larry Fink's education in discipline began in a far quieter place. A small family shoe store in Van Nuys, California. The shop smelled of leather and polish, its narrow aisles stacked with boxes that had to be sorted, lifted, and restocked with an attention to detail that left little room for shortcuts. His father ran the store with a steady, almost stubborn commitment to service. His mother managed the books with a precision that never wavered. It was not glamorous work, but it was relentless, and it formed the operating principles that Fink carried long after he left the store behind. The lesson was simple and unforgiving. Nothing ran unless you showed up, worked, and stayed until it was done. He watched his parents navigate good weeks and bad ones, adjusting to inventory shortages, seasonal lulls, and customers who wandered in without buying. Risk in that environment was not a theoretical construct. It was the question of whether the family would make rent. That grounding, quiet, unadorned, unpretentious, followed him long after he earned degrees from UCLA. He arrived in finance without the pedigree of Ivy League institutions, which meant he carried neither entitlement nor illusions. What he did carry was velocity, an instinct to work harder, read deeper, and out-prepare anyone else in the room. When he joined First Boston in the late 1970s, Wall Street was undergoing a fundamental transformation. Capital markets were expanding. and the traditional bank lending model was giving way to more complex instruments. Fink entered at the precise moment when innovation rewarded those willing to think past convention. He did not try to mimic the old guard. Instead, he studied the inefficiencies in how money moved, and he found opportunity in the overlooked parts of the system. Mortgage-backed securities were not yet a Wall Street sensation when he began exploring them. At the time, the idea of bundling thousands of home loans into a single instrument sounded to many like a niche experiment. But Fink saw structure where others saw chaos. If loans could be aggregated, analyzed, and priced with statistical rigor, they could be transformed from illiquid assets into marketable products. This was not a bet on a trend. It was a bet on data, modeling, and the ability to predict behavior across millions of borrowers. By the early 1980s, his team's innovations were generating profits at a scale that startled even seasoned executives. The mortgage market, once a sleepy corner of finance, suddenly became a growth engine. Fink's models allowed the firm to price risk in ways competitors could not match. In the building's executive suite, his name became shorthand for reliability and vision. He was promoted rapidly, entrusted with greater responsibility, and given a seat at tables where strategy shaped entire markets. But beneath the triumph lay a tension that would eventually define his future. Success brought recognition, and recognition brought pressure. Wall Street culture, especially in those years, rewarded confidence even when it shaded into certainty. The more his trade succeeded, the more colleagues deferred to his instincts. The more the models worked, the more the firm relied on them without questioning their limits. The glow around his rise made it easy to forget the lessons of the shoe store: that systems fail, assumptions break, and risk always demands respect. By the mid-1980s, Fink had become a symbol of Wall Street's new frontier: innovative, aggressive, and seemingly untouchable. Yet just beyond the curve, unseen but approaching, was the miscalculation that would strip away that aura and expose the vulnerabilities beneath it. The climb had been steep and rapid. The fall would be sharper. In the months after his departure from First Boston, Larry Fink moved through New York with the quiet calculation of someone dissecting his own past. Publicly, he kept his composure. Privately, the humiliation of the $100 million loss weighed on him with a density he could not ignore. Every meeting he walked into carried an unspoken question: was he finished? On Wall Street, redemption was rare. Reinvention was even rarer. Yet Fink refused to disappear into the footnotes of someone else's success story. He met former colleagues in coffee shops, small conference rooms, and borrowed offices. Any place that offered a table and a few spare hours. These gatherings had none of the swagger of his earlier career. There were no victory laps, no boasts, no assumptions of future glory. Instead, they were working sessions, intense and audibly raw. He laid out a premise that cut against the culture that had just expelled him. Finance needed discipline, not bravado. Measurement, not myth. A risk, he argued, should not be the caboose of the investment process. It should be the engine. A small group believed him. Rob Capito, analytical and steady, became the indispensable counterweight to Fink's relentless drive. Others joined, not because success looked guaranteed. It didn't. But because they sensed a coherence in his vision that Wall Street had ignored. The team was not built from stars, but from believers, people who wanted to rethink the architecture of asset management from the ground up. The breakthrough came when Fink secured an early audience with Steve Schwarzman, co-founder of Blackstone. Schwarzman was building his own empire, but he recognized opportunity in Fink's pitch: an asset management arm anchored not in speculation, but in risk control. The partnership gave Fink institutional credibility and enough oxygen to begin constructing the framework of what would initially be called Blackstone Financial Management. Yet from the start, tension simmered beneath the alliance. Both men were ambitious, both were uncompromising, and both believed they understood how the future of finance should be shaped. Equity shares and control rights became strategic fault lines. Fink wanted autonomy to build the firm according to his philosophy: data first, risk first, independence first. Schwartzman, accustomed to leadership, pushed for ownership structures that protected Blackstone's influence. What began as a collaboration gradually evolved into a rivalry, one sharpened by two different visions of empire building. As assets grew and clients responded to Fink's rigorous, almost obsessive approach to risk analytics, the internal friction became impossible to contain. The split was not theatrical, but it was definitive. Fink negotiated a separation, taking his team and the business they had built together. In 1994, the severed entity was renamed BlackRock. What looked like a divorce from the outside felt, on the inside, like a liberation. The rebirth of the firm marked a new chapter in Fink's life, a shift from being a trader with a skill to a founder with a blueprint. BlackRock's mission sharpened: translate the chaos of global markets into structured, measurable, actionable intelligence. Every decision, every hire, every product was oriented toward that purpose. If First Boston had been the arena where he tested his instincts, BlackRock became the laboratory where he engineered his corrections. In these early years, the firm had none of the inevitability it would later project, but it had something rarer: a leader shaped not by uninterrupted success, but by failure that had cut deep enough to change him. The company's foundation rested on that wound, on the clarity it produced, and on a vow he repeated to his team. Never again would risk be an afterthought, and never again would a blind spot threaten the house he was building. BlackRock's early momentum came from discipline and focus, but its true inflection point arrived when Larry Fink began assembling a team that looked nothing like a traditional Wall Street operation. While rival firms competed for traders with sharp instincts or flamboyant track records, Fink sought out mathematicians, physicists, software engineers, and systems architects. To outsiders, these hires seemed almost eccentric, a departure from the culture that had built the financial elite. To Fink, they were the cornerstone of the future he intended to build. The idea took shape gradually. Markets were becoming more complex, more products, more interdependencies, more data moving faster than any trader could interpret. The crisis that had ended his first Boston tenure had revealed the limits of intuition. What he needed was a machine capable of understanding risk with a level of consistency no human could match. Not a tool, not a model, a full operating system for global capital. The embryo of that vision became Aladdin, the asset, liability, debt, and derivative investment network. The name sounded almost whimsical at first, a nod to the notion of revealing hidden truths, but the architecture was anything but fanciful. From the beginning, Fink insisted on a system that ingested massive volumes of data, processed them with mathematical rigor, and translated outcomes into something investment teams could trust. No gut calls, no shortcuts, just clarity. The earliest prototypes were built in cramped rooms lined with whiteboards, cables, and endless drafts of code. Engineers debated algorithms, while portfolio managers explained the nuances of mortgage cash flows, corporate credit, and sovereign risk. It was an unlikely fusion, quantitative logic meeting market instincts, software engineers working elbow to elbow with traders who had spent decades on Wall Street. But Fink enforced the collaboration with discipline. Aladdin would not be a tool used by the firm. It would be the firm's backbone. By the mid-1990s, the system had already begun to separate BlackRock from its competitors. Portfolio risk could be evaluated in real time, across asset classes, across continents. A single security could be analyzed through thousands of hypothetical scenarios: rising rates, collapsing equity markets, fluctuating currencies, shifting commodity cycles. What had once required days of manual analysis could now be processed in seconds. Clients noticed. Regulators noticed. Rivals noticed. As the system matured, its influence expanded beyond BlackRock's immediate operations. Banks, insurers, pension funds, and eventually sovereign institutions began licensing Aladdin for their own portfolios. This was the breakthrough that changed everything. Instead of competing with Wall Street, BlackRock became embedded inside it. Even institutions managing trillions of dollars, some of which viewed BlackRock as a rival, used Aladdin to evaluate their risk. The system effectively became finance's central nervous system. The scale of this advantage was difficult to overstate. While other firms fought over performance rankings and profit margins, BlackRock gained visibility into how markets behaved far beyond its own assets under management. The data flowing through Aladdin gave Fink something no CEO before him had possessed: a panoramic, real-time view of global risk exposure across institutions. It wasn't power in the theatrical sense. It was influence derived from infrastructure. If the global financial system was a labyrinth, BlackRock held the map. Inside the firm, Fink treated Aladdin not as a finished invention, but as an evolving organism. The teams expanded, algorithms advanced, and the system's predictive capabilities grew. It became capable of stress testing entire economies, simulating contagion patterns, and modeling events that hadn't yet occurred in modern markets. The ethos was consistent: prepare for the worst, understand the pathways of failure, and never again be caught blind. By the turn of the millennium, BlackRock was no longer just an asset manager. It was the architect of a platform that shaped how risk was understood at a global scale. And with Aladdin humming beneath every decision, Fink had constructed the very thing his earlier failure had demanded: a machine built not on confidence but on comprehension. The tool that would one day define his power had already taken its first breath. By the summer of 2008, the global financial system was cracking in slow motion. Banks whispered reassurances they no longer believed. Liquidity evaporated overnight, and institutions that had once appeared unshakable began to list under the weight of their own leverage. Inside BlackRock's headquarters, the atmosphere was tense, but unusually controlled. Aladdin was flashing alerts weeks before the broader market acknowledged the danger. While other firms scrambled to understand their own exposures, BlackRock's teams were already running stress scenarios, mapping contagion patterns, and preparing for outcomes that regulators still considered unthinkable. When Lehman Brothers collapsed in September, the illusion of market stability disintegrated completely. Within days, Washington's most senior financial authorities found themselves navigating decisions that carried global consequences. Timothy Geithner at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, officials at the Treasury Department, and advisors close to the Federal Reserve needed clarity, fast. They needed to know which assets were toxic, which were salvageable, and what would happen if cascading failures continued. Only one institution had the analytical capacity to answer such questions without guesswork. It was not a ceremonial invitation. It was a plea for expertise in a moment when conventional wisdom had failed. Fink had spent 2 decades building a firm anchored in risk analysis. Now, The US government needed that discipline to stabilize the largest financial system in the world. BlackRock was commissioned to dissect portfolios no one else could decipher. Mortgage securities accumulated by collapsing banks, distressed credit instruments poisoning balance sheets, and entire asset pools whose value had become impossible to estimate. Inside a secured conference room in Lower Manhattan, BlackRock teams worked alongside federal officials, sifting through instruments so complex that even their original creators struggled to explain them. The work demanded clinical precision. Decisions made in those rooms would determine which institutions survived, how bailout funds were allocated, and how deeply the crisis would scar the real economy. Aladdin became the central tool for triage, its analytics shaping strategies that impacted pension funds, homeowners, and global markets. For Fink, the moment carried a mix of validation and gravity. His system, born from the wound of his own failure, had become the instrument Washington relied upon when the stakes were existential. But the visibility brought questions that hovered just beyond the reach of official narratives. BlackRock was a private firm, yet here it was, conducting examinations of assets for government agencies, determining valuations that influenced trillions of dollars in emergency interventions. Critics asked whether any single entity should possess that kind of access. Supporters argued that no one else had the capability or the calm required. The moniker emerged quietly at first, whispered by analysts and journalists trying to capture the scale of influence BlackRock had acquired. The fourth branch of government. Not elected, not appointed, but essential. Fink did not publicly embrace the title. He understood the sensitivities, but he also did not deny that BlackRock stood in a position few private companies had ever approached. By the time markets began stabilizing in 2009, BlackRock's role in the crisis had reshaped its trajectory. Clients saw the firm not as another asset manager, but as a guardian of stability, an institution that had navigated chaos using discipline instead of bravado. Assets poured in. Mandates expanded globally. Governments and central banks abroad took note, and new partnerships followed. Yet the crisis also marked a transition for Fink personally. He had moved from being a talented financier to a figure whose decisions affected nations. Aladdin had proven its indispensability, and BlackRock's reputation hardened into something approaching systemic importance. In the aftermath of the worst financial collapse since the Great Depression, Larry Fink had become, whether admired or feared, one of the most influential financial leaders in the modern era. By the 2010s, BlackRock's rise had reached a scale few observers had anticipated, and even fewer understood. The firm managed assets that exceeded the GDP of most nations, and its technology, especially Aladdin, had become the invisible backbone of global finance. Larry Fink, once the trader brought down by a catastrophic miscalculation, now presided over an enterprise whose reach extended into virtually every corner of the world economy. BlackRock owned stakes in thousands of companies, influenced boardrooms across continents, and advised governments on matters that ranged from pension reform to sovereign debt restructuring. Power, in this context, was not an abstract notion. It was measurable. The more BlackRock grew, the more Fink's position shifted from financial executive to global statesman. His annual letter to CEOs became a fixture in corporate America, a document that executives read with the attention usually reserved for regulatory guidance. In these letters, he pushed for long-term thinking, environmental sustainability, and a reorientation away from short-term shareholder pressure. He framed these ideas not as political stances, but as obligations tied to fiduciary responsibility. Companies that ignored climate risk, he argued, were exposing themselves to financial instability. But in the United States' increasingly polarized climate, the nuance evaporated. One camp accused Fink of weaponizing finance to advance a woke agenda. Conservative lawmakers denounced his support for ESG, environmental, social, and governance criteria, and attempted to block state funds from working with BlackRock. At the same time, many progressive organizations argued that his sustainability rhetoric amounted to selective morality. BlackRock still invested in fossil fuel companies, still held stakes in industries shaping carbon output, and still profited from the portfolios it claimed to challenge. To critics on both sides, Fink represented a contradiction. Too political, yet never political enough. Despite the noise, his influence did not diminish. When governments faced mounting questions about infrastructure financing, retirement systems, and climate-related economic risk, BlackRock remained the partner of choice. Leaders in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East treated the firm not merely as an advisor, but as a structural component of their financial planning. The global pivot toward passive investing only magnified this power. BlackRock's iShares ETF became a default investment vehicle for millions of households, embedding the firm deep into the savings of ordinary workers. Inside BlackRock, the culture reflected Fink's dual identity: mission-driven, yet relentlessly pragmatic. Teams were pushed to innovate, to anticipate regulatory shifts, to deepen the capabilities of Aladdin, and to operate with precision that bordered on clinical. The system continued evolving, growing more complex, more predictive, and more indispensable. Competitors attempted to replicate it. None successfully did. Yet even as BlackRock achieved unprecedented dominance, Fink recognized the inherent fragility of perception. Influence brought scrutiny. Scrutiny brought narrative battles. And narrative battles, if mishandled, could erode legitimacy. He began speaking more cautiously in public, yet with more urgency in private. He warned that geopolitical fragmentation, climate stress, and demographic shifts were converging into a new era of volatility, an environment in which risk would not merely be a category of analysis, but the defining lens for global markets. In that sense, the arc of his career had come full circle. The same forces that humbled him early on, hidden risk, flawed assumptions, complacent systems, were now the very conditions his firm was built to navigate. Larry Fink had become the most consequential figure in modern finance, not because he avoided catastrophe, but because he learned how to model it, quantify it, and prepare for it in ways others could not. Whether seen as visionary, empire builder, or unelected power broker, he had become impossible to ignore. Conclusion: Larry Fink's story is, at its core, a narrative of reckoning. First with failure, then with the staggering responsibilities that followed his comeback. His early collapse at First Boston revealed a blind spot that defined an entire generation of financiers. Risk was misunderstood, mispriced, and often outright ignored. Instead of retreating from that realization, Fink transformed it into a mandate. BlackRock emerged not from confidence but from contrition, built on the belief that markets could be navigated only through relentless measurement and disciplined skepticism. Across 3 decades, he constructed a firm whose influence now surpasses that of traditional banking empires. Aladdin became the silent infrastructure behind global capital flows, and BlackRock's presence embedded itself in pensions, sovereign funds, insurance portfolios, and households worldwide. With that reach came the paradox of modern power. The more essential the institution became, the more pressure it absorbed from the political, social, and economic tensions shaping the 21st century. Fink, now a central figure in debates about capitalism's future, stands at a critical intersection. To some, he is a stabilizing force, a leader who insists that long-term thinking is not ideology but necessity. To others, he represents an unelected authority whose reach exceeds any democratic mandate. Both interpretations speak to the magnitude of the role he has built.